I'm told by Fox News over and over again that BLM is very, very dangerous. Both kinds of BLMs, but with different conclusions. What BLMs? Well, one is Black Lives Matter, and Bill O'Reilly tells me they're a hate group, and because of a chant that they did while they were joking around with the cops at the time. Because of that chant, they're very, very, very dangerous. And then there's the Bureau of Land Management, and the Bundy and Militia fight against that BLM. Now, I'm told by Sean Hannity, who had Cliven Bundy on his show many times and defended him, that the Bureau of Land Management is at fault, and Cliven Bundy and his boys, who have now taken over a federal building in Oregon, who point weapons at guns' heads, are not dangerous. Okay, I'm going to chalk that up to irony. So, but if it was just Fox News and just the right-wing nut jobs, you might say, okay, they're biased because those right-wing terrorists and they want to protect them because they're right-wingers. And right-wingers are generally more violent, so they like grabbing guns and trying to, sort things out with that kind of violence. But what about the general press? Well, they go along every time. If it's white folks, well, they're just protesters, right? Black folks, dangerous, dangerous. Muslims, national headlines, right? So first of all, Associated Press puts out this tweet about this situation. Let's read it. Peaceful protest in Oregon, rancher arson case, followed by building takeover at National Wildlife Refuge. Oh, I see. We had a peaceful protest, and then a little takeover of a federal building. Nothing to look at here, just white folks. They won't do any damage. Let's just move along. I mean, they've threatened to kill cops before. They're threatening to kill cops now. But it was started as a peaceful protest. Can you imagine if they wrote about the San Bernardino shooters? A peaceful Christmas party attended by two wonderful Muslims turned into something else later when they shot everybody in the building. Yeah, I wouldn't talk about the peaceful part in the beginning because that's not the relevant part of the story. It makes it as if you're framing it like, they're just protesters. To which, then look, Fox News calls them armed protesters, not terrorists, not thugs. It's not like Fox News doesn't know how to use the word thugs. They use it all the time. But these guys with weapons that took over a federal building, not thugs, just armed protesters. I see. Black Lives Matter's protest cops shooting them in the head and killing them and murdering them and their kids, 12-year-old Tamir Rice, 17-year-old Laquan McDonald. Those people are murdered, and they say perfectly peacefully, no guns, no nothing, no weapons. They say, could the cops please stop murdering us? Thugs, hate group, how dare you? You're endangering cops. These guys say, I've got all my assault rifles. I walked in and stolen a federal building, and if cops walk in, I'm going to shoot them in the head and murder them. Armed protesters. That started out peacefully. Okay. New York Times is a liberal rag, I hear, from the right wing, so they're going to cover this case all over the paper, right? I mean, it's giant headlines. I mean, again, if 12 Muslim jihadis walked in with guns and took a federal building, I'm pretty sure it'd get a pretty large headline in New York Times. Have you found it yet? Yeah, lower left corner. Oh, by the way, white people take over a federal building with guns. Let's move along. Okay, not a big deal. Okay. Now, some people on Twitter pointed out the hypocrisy of this. So C.D. King writes in with this tweet, what's the difference between a terrorist cell and a militia? Religion is skin color, and he's got guys that look identical. One's called a terrorist, the other one's called a conservative. To be fair, the conservative, while having the same weapons, is holding an American flag. Roland Martin asks on Twitter, did I miss the call for the National Guard in Oregon? I recall them in Ferguson and Baltimore. Yeah, why were they in Ferguson and Baltimore? This was particularly poignant. It was comparing the Tamir Rice situation with what we've got here. And in this tweet by Carlos Latouf, we've got Tamir Rice with a toy gun labeled a thug, and then you've got a giant guy with a real gun who's white and has an NRA hat, and he is labeled a patriot. Well, I mean, that's what they say they are. They got a funny way of showing patriotism by taking over government buildings and committing, in essence, what is treason against the U.S. government, saying they're going to steal further U.S. land if it continues. So you'll excuse me if I don't call that patriotic. Okay, now there was another guy on Twitter, and I bring this up only because these wind up getting a lot of coverage and being retweeted thousands of times. And that's me. I asked, did the cops shoot the armed thugs who took over the federal property within 2 seconds? Oh no, that's only for black children. I also said, let's be clear, if Muslims had seized the federal building, they'd all be dead by now. And then one more here. I want Fox News to answer this now. If a single one of those militia members points a gun at a cop, what should happen? Okay. Now, at the same time, real quick, let me show you what the New York Post and Fox News called Black Lives Matter. They called it, quote, a war on cops. No. This is a war on cops when you threaten to shoot them in the head. When you protest them shooting you in the head, that's not a war on cops. That's asking the cops to do a better job. Okay, and then we were told that a rise in crime was, quote, the Ferguson effect. Again, even the New York Times talked about this nonsense. There was no such thing. Vox explains throughout the year, criminologists also repeatedly cautioned that there's no evidence of a nationwide wave of violence. They've also said that there's no evidence that Black Lives Matter protests have anything to do with a potential rise in violence. So that was made up. There was no Ferguson effect. Now, CNN says, they bring in Art Roderick, a law enforcement analyst, to say about these guys who took over a property with weapons, federal property. They're not destroying property. They're not looting anything. That's not Fox News. That's CNN saying it. What do you mean they're not looting anything? They took the whole fucking building. If those black protesters who didn't have weapons had taken over a whole federal building and said, if you come in here, we shoot you, I assure you that they would have been called far worse than thugs. But when it's a white militia who does it, we're having an interesting opinion about this. And nothing to see here. Everybody move on. They're not thugs looting anything. They're not destroying property. They just stole the whole fucking thing. They didn't destroy it. They just took it. Just like they did with their Bundy Ranch, where they said, well, I'm not going to pay you taxes on it. I'm just going to steal it. I think that's, at a minimum, what I would call a thug.